Welcome to On a Way with Russel Botman, in conversation with Professor Ronelle Carolissen. Ronelle is a clinical psychologist and academic at Stellenbosch University, where she mainly teaches and does research. Welcome, Ronelle.
Well, thank you, Bill. Well, it's really a pleasure to be here today.
Ronelle, we were just chatting about how somebody asked us if we are chomies, which means like very close friends. And I said no, but we are friends and we are good friends. And so it just also reminded me of what our connection was. And I remember our connection was Russel.
Yes, our connection was Russell, and that has evolved over the years. And I'll tell you how the connection came about, in a very strange way, because I always valued Russell and Russell's presence at Stellenbosch University, because I think he took very seriously the ways in which women and black people were marginalized, especially in a space like Stellenbosch University. And so I valued him, well, for that, but of course not only for that, for his stance on, on many things which I explored in um, the lecture I did at in 2021. Um, but that's how we initially got connected. I obviously had seen you around because you always accompanied him, um, and then subsequent to his death, I saw you at various events at the
Yes.
cousin's funeral in my mother's ancestral village.
Yes, goed
God
gedaan.
verwacht, God verwacht. And I was astonished that Beryl is here. How are you here, Beryl? So, and then we've gone out on a few occasions, and so the relationship has grown in unexpected ways. And we also now share this unenviable identity of being widows,
Yes, yes,
and
that brings us even closer together.
absolutely,
Yes.
and I valued you coming to my home when John passed away. So,
Yeah. So I initially heard it was hearsay about this Ronelle Carolissen and met you, knew how to put a face to the name. Russell spoke very highly of you and your career and the contributions that you make on so many different levels at Stellenbosch University, not only in your department, but also in the broader community, and how he encouraged you to go and work in the education faculty, also with your skills and knowledge and attitudes about psychology and the contribution you made to education on that level in general education training. So my admiration for you was quite high already when we started making more and more connections. And it eventually led to me having the courage to ask you to conduct the interview with me at Stellenbosch University, where I launched my first book without you. You remember
of
that?
course, I
Yes,
remember
yeah.
that interview very well. Yeah.
And but before the interview, what really stays with me is how I brought you, I think it was still a printer's copy or something. It wasn't the final copy of my book for you to read, to prepare. And I was welcomed into your home. And the lovely hospitality, the warmth, and your daughter Melissa was there, and your late husband John, and we had a good old chat, and I felt really at ease. I do value the people that I choose to have interviews with me about my writing. Yes. I must feel a connection with him. I must know that they know how I'm thinking, how I'm feeling, to do that kind of thing. And in you, I found that person.
Look, I'd like to think that I'm respectful of of people's efforts that they put into their work. So it's really good to hear that feedback. I am, smiling when you talk about that time you came to my house, because afterwards I told Melissa, "Yo, Melissa, don't don't just bring the box with the cake and put it on the table like these young people do." Or they won't put chips in a bowl, they'll just put the chips and roll it around and make the chips an actual box. So they'll just put it like that. And I said, you know what, the older generation don't like that. So it was so funny. We had a good laugh about it.
Yeah. So it was that I tapped into in terms of my first book because I realized in writing that story and living that story how important psychological support is. And I know, and that is why I invited you here today to tell us about your um, involvement and your impact, and you don't have to be shy about it in that, and also with the teaching of prospective teachers and how important that is.
Look, I obviously have to think quite a lot because I qualified as a teacher in 1988, a high school teacher. And then I taught for a short while at Witterboomer High in Wynberg. But it had always been my dream, as it is many people's dream, to become a clinical psychologist. And I had pursued that, and teaching was a brief interlude on my way to becoming a psychologist. So I qualified as a psychologist 32 years ago. I look at that time span with horror because it doesn't feel like 32 years. So I qualified in 1993 as a clinical psychologist, and I've done a number of varied things as a psychologist. The why I think one has to start with why did I want to become a psychologist? I think for me it was simple. It was a values driven decision to make a difference to the lives of people who can't afford psychological services, um, to make a difference to the lives of communities who can't afford, and to also help to reshape the discipline of psychology itself. So the questions we asked aren't very different from the questions we're asking today, 32 years later. What is the relevance of psychology in the lives of people, of ordinary people? Um, People who are, because psychology, as we hear today still, is shaped um, to benefit from Eurocentric perspectives, to benefit um, white, middle class, and generally richer people who can afford expensive psychological services. And those were the questions we were asking. And it also, at the time, there was enormous state orchestrated political violence. So yes, that is how I started in psychology and was attracted to psychology. And of course, I also, which is very important, I also had to learn the traditional knowledges. The therapies, I still teach some of the traditional knowledges. So I had to learn that, but also the realization that that is not only what psychology is about, that it extends far beyond just working with individuals and groups.
Yes, and I can understand that might also be the reason why you went into the education faculty. Do you see that also
Yeah.
as an extension of
Look,
that?
I'll be honest. The reason I moved to education is because my promotions were blocked, and I felt I should have been promoted at the time already, but it wasn't at the time. My uh, and probably still for many people today, um, black women have to do twice as much to be equal. And so even with a good CV, I could not be promoted just to a senior lecturer. Um, and colleagues in the education faculty invited me to apply for an associate professor. And the irony of the matter in community psychology, the irony of the matter is that the same CV that couldn't get me promoted on one side of the road got me an associate professor on the other side of the road. So I did that within the same university. And And yes, I mean, I've learned a lot from that experience. I think it is a little easier now for people, but it was tough. And I had to make a decision: do I stay or do I go? And I really enjoyed working in education because I think teachers have a special opportunity to work at the primary healthcare level. We talk about community clinics as being located at the primary healthcare level, but teachers have a special gift because they often the first line of call when when they identify that children have challenges, that even colleagues have challenges. And I think that is what was very interesting about my move to educational psychology, even though I'm trained as a clinical psychologist.
Yeah, so you have brought all that experience and knowledge and known throughout the world for your contributions and your writings, um, in particularly that role of community, of empowerment of communities as broadly as possible. And now, when we started out, to remember when we got closer was with our the book launch of Without You, and then you interviewed me as a widow, still being with John, your late husband, and then you became the widow. How has your life changed? I don't know. Yeah.
Mm. It's a very interesting thing. Uh, my first, well, I would say my close experience of widowhood was through my mother becoming a widow at the age of 53. My dad literally dropped down dead one morning while preparing to get ready for school. So he had a major heart attack at the age of 55. And my mom was suddenly a widow, and so that was my experience of widowhood. I think there's nothing that can prepare one for your own widowhood. Um, it's the kind of thing that you know may come, and that you wish never arrives. The day never arrives. But yes, on the 12th of December, on the 8th of July, 2024, I knew John wasn't going to make it. I phoned all my daughters and said to them, I don't think your dad's going to make it. And then on the 12th of December, we turned down the life support. Um, I think I've lost a father, I've lost a mother, I've lost a brother, and those losses pale into the background when compared to the loss of a partner and husband. Um, John and I were partners for 36 years. Every single aspect of my life changed. Um, it is a profound change of identity. Tomorrow it will be 14 months since John passed away. And it's a profound identity change because people start seeing you as these two people who hang out together, who always at the same places and do enjoy similar things. But I think at the same time, my saving grace and what sustains me, apart from family and friends, is the fact that I had a career outside of our relationship. He was very much part of it and supportive of it, but I had a life outside of our relationship. And I think I'm eternally grateful for that because in the first few months, I told some of my colleagues at work that my home, in which I've been living for 33 years, feels like a strange place, and my work feels more like home. That has been restored now, and so I know, and I'm giving myself the opportunity to cry at silly things. When I take the pan, in which John's favorite pan, I started bawling one day when I took that steak pan out for the first time to do the steak because that was his division. But I wanted to do that, and so I had to will myself to do those things. So yes, it's a process, it's a journey. Grief never goes away, and I know that my task is about learning to live with that grief as best I can while at the same time learning to make my own way and to enjoy life and to find joy in the things. If I go by anything, my mother was 94 when she passed away, outlived my father by 42 years. My aunt is 92, so I could easily have another 30 years ahead of me.
So celebrate your centenary.
So I
Right.
am I look for things that I enjoy apart from my work. I think one of the things that widowhood has taught me, again, because I knew it, but that relationships matter and that work is not the most important, although valuable and important, it is not the most important thing in my life.
Yes, two things. The one thing is about how important it is for us to tell our stories, and even because of our different experiences. But before I get there, I just want to connect with your mother, who became a widow at 53, which is exactly the age that I was when I became a widow. And I uh, can identify with that, also a sudden death and all of that. It's the same kind of thing. But I want to also add that my widowhood is totally different. I think not totally, but it is different to your widowhood. I gave up my career for our marriage, and I don't regret it for a day. But I've continued to work at my career in terms of my studies. That is how I kept up with that, and how widowhood brings you to a point that you have to find different grounding because your whole balance is taken away from you. With you you went into your career. You could take that forward. For me, it was a certain sense of continuing, but picking up other issues as well to fill up that gap, that this huge gaping wound left in my life, and to take that up, and which took me into new but not strange, because writing as an educationist, as a linguist, language teacher specialist, um, felt comfortable in that, and into new spaces like this podcasting. Speaking is also one of the things that a teacher and an educationist is well comfortable with. And so and that is why I find this important, that we speak about our different experiences, for, if nothing else, for other widows or other women or men to be able to identify and see. Because the important thing is to search within yourself and find in yourself what it is that is going to take you forward from that big loss.
You know, I think that searching in yourself is a really important thing to do. Precisely because, as I said earlier, one's identity is fundamentally questioned. Um, it was in those first few weeks, part of what I did, the first month, even, or two or three, was reorganize books, categorize. And I thought it was like reorganizing myself internally by externalizing that organization. Because it's like you're looking back on your own life and you're questioning your own mortality. What are the things that you need to do? And if you have everything in place financially, what happens if I should die, drop down dead today? Financially, emotionally, spiritually. I think the other big thing for me was I was eternally grateful that I don't have young children. But and I think that's a very different experience of widowhood to for your partner to pass away when your children are very young. But it still makes me a single parent. And I thought, oh my God, I'm a single parent. I better start doing my health checks more regularly. I'd better start exercising a bit more. So I'm taking a lot better care of myself and taking more time, because even though our children are adults, um, children actually never leave you until you die, or you leave them behind when you die, because there's always the chats, the advice when asked for. not when asked for, always their advice and all of those things. So parenting continues beyond 18, and I'm one of those parents. So yeah, I mean, I think for me that is one of my bigger anxieties. There's lots of anxieties around becoming a widow. Will I be able to manage? How do I? Will Are people asking you nonsense questions like, will you get into a relationship again? Well, at this point, why should I? You know, the children's friends asking them, do you think your mother will date again? They say, not in the first 3 months. I don't know. I don't feel like I want to, but that could change too.
So, in conclusion to this lovely conversation of ours, as a widowed clinical psychologist, do you have anything to say to women out there and men?
You know, let me think about that. As a widowed clinical psychologist, everybody's realities are different. Some people may actually be relieved that their partner died because it may not have been the best relationship. Um, I look at quite a couple of blogs and I see, how people find out secrets post about their partners post death, which make them very angry. Um, so I don't think there's a recipe for widowhood per se, but I think the one thing that may be helpful is to think about who you are, who you want to be as a person, and to seek out the opportunities that will take you on that route. And I think that is probably the best advice I can give, if advice is a good thing, but which it's not always, because people must find their own path and their own journeys.
Thank you, Ronelle, for this wonderful conversation. Um, we have learned from each other yet again. Go well as an academic at Stellenbosch University and also as a mother and as a widow. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Beryl. It was a privilege to share this time with you, and all the best for your continued podcast.
Thank you for joining On a Way with Russel Botman in conversation with Ronelle Carolissen. Walk tall, tell it all. You've been listening to On a Way with Russel Botman. You can purchase my books online on Amazon, Take-A-Lot, and at bookstores like Exclusive Books, Bargain Books, independent bookstores, and Barnes & Noble internationally. To connect with me, please follow me on Facebook to learn more about my book launches and talks. You can write to me at beryl.botman60@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.